The timing of this is not coincidental. His accuser's memoir is out tomorrow. My sense is that the King and Prince William probably want to try and clear the slate of, let's call it euphemistically, the dodgy uncle problem.
There was nothing warm and cuddly about Maduro when I met him. I mean, the guy just cannot grasp what a legitimate election is or what democracy is.
But this is exaggerated, wildly hysterical evidence. We do have a problem with drugs coming into the United States, but they come from everywhere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of The X-Files. Today, Jamie and I are going to be talking about Venezuela. With a crumbling ceasefire Trump is hastily trying to shore up back in the Middle East. There's a real war brewing in his own backyard, Venezuela. And we're going to ask, is regime change their mandate, and is it ever a good thing? We're going to do something slightly different this week as well. I'm going to be talking to my global colleague, Emily Maitlis from the newsagents, about the Prince Andrew international story. She's the one who, with her famous Newsnight interview, hastened his demise over the Epstein affair. And finally, Jamie and I will be back with our recommendations to wrap up today's episode. Hello and welcome. It is me, Christiane Amanpour, with the X-Files.
And I'm Jamie Rubin, former official in the State Department twice.
Yeah, and I am a former I am a CNN global correspondent and also anchor my own show where I try to hold world leaders accountable. And why do we call it The X-Files? Because we were married for 20 years and we've been divorced for about 7 or whatever it is now, but hence The X-Files. So Jamie, let's get started. Let's talk about Venezuela. It's happening in your hemisphere. Who knew that that would be where the next war potentially started? But it's something the Trumpies seem to be going, full bore, or all guns blazing, blowing up boats in the off the coast of Venezuela and elsewhere, and essentially getting ready for regime change.
Well, you're right. There's three things about this that I think are interesting above all. Number one, we've talked before about how Trump sort of sees the world like the Western Hemisphere with Colombia and Venezuela and Canada and Mexico. That's his part of the world. Putin has his part of the world, including Ukraine, and China has its part of the world, including Taiwan. And so this policy of essentially gunboat diplomacy going back to the 19th century of trying to dictate the regime in Venezuela and using military power is something that I think is a case where Marco Rubio, his sort of aide de camp as national security advisor and secretary of state, et cetera, has always cared a lot about Latin America, has always seen the Venezuelan regime, first under Chavez and now under Maduro, as kind of part of the communist bloc that he's been fighting his whole life. And thirdly, they have essentially put forward a policy that is extremely difficult to implement, namely regime change. Now, sometimes it works, as they did with Panama, with Noriega. The first George Bush overthrew Noriega, successfully put him in prison. But it's very, very difficult to do. And we've seen regime change fail over and over again in Afghanistan, in Iraq. One good case is Kosovo. As you know, we've talked about that. But the lessons of regime change in the Middle East don't seem to be learned. And I don't see how even 10,000 troops and all these boats and these aircraft will force Maduro to leave office. I just don't see it.
So let's just talk about Kosovo. That was a humanitarian intervention because the then leader of Serbia, Yugoslavia, Slobodan Milosevic, was about to inflict essentially the same kind of genocide and ethnic cleansing on Kosovo that he had done in Bosnia during the 90s. So the Clinton administration and others intervened. So that was a whole different thing. So it leads me to the question, is Venezuela a real threat to the United States? They tried to make out that Iraq was because of weapons of mass destruction. They didn't exist. Um, what about Venezuela?
I think this is another case of hyping the threat. So the United States clearly
Well,
has
what
a
is the
drug problem.
threat?
They claim it's drugs. They claim that Venezuela is connected to a drug gang which imports or exports fentanyl and cocaine and heroin into the United States. But this is exaggerated, wildly hysterical evidence. We do have a problem with drugs coming into the United States, but they come from everywhere. And Venezuela, according to the administration's own intelligence services. The Maduro government doesn't control this gang that Trump always uses as an example of who he's attacking. So they're conflating a whole bunch of stuff. Maduro as a dictator who lost an election but refused to give up power. Maduro as connected to drugs and drugs being a threat to the United States. And Maduro as part of a, quote, strongman communist bloc like Cuba and Nicaragua. But none of them add up to a real threat to the United States. And I never thought the Bush administration lied about WMD. I thought they were wrong. But they didn't intentionally lie. I think we have clear evidence this time that the intelligence community does not believe that the Venezuelan government is
Mhm.
controlling the drug trade that is causing so much damage to the United States. The
Okay.
intelligence community over and over again says, no, I'm sorry, I can't say that. And Trump fires people who don't say what he wants them to
Right.
say.
So
So
he did fire the staffer who wrote the report that he didn't like on Maduro's links. Let's just get it clear. Fentanyl is a Mexico thing coming from China via Mexico. It is cocaine mostly that they're talking about in Venezuela, but even that doesn't mostly go up from Venezuela to the United States. There are many other ingress points, as they like to say formally, for cocaine into the US, including from the Pacific. But yes, he fired the staffer who wrote that memo about all of this. And then, Jamie, the I think it's the head of Southern Command, the Admiral, who resigned. He didn't say exactly why he resigned, but he's the one in charge of the American forces that are being deployed around Venezuela and would be deployed if Trump actually did do some kind of land striking, targeting, invasion, and certainly since he's an admiral, he knows what's going on the high seas right now. So he's resigned. That's pretty dramatic, I think.
I do think so as well. And so here's where we get to the really subtle, interesting, hard legal questions. There is a rule, a law, that soldiers in the military are not supposed to follow illegal orders. So if they're ordered to slaughter innocent civilians, they're not supposed to follow those orders. That's the code of conduct for military officers. There are real questions as to whether what the administration is doing in the Caribbean and against Venezuela is legal at all, under what basis it's being done. Congress has the power to declare war. I worked on this issue of the War Powers Act. What is Congress's power? What's the president's power? When I worked for Senator Biden, we had a long set of hearings about who has the power to start a war. And what's clear is that the president's power is big, but it's really designed only for emergencies when Congress can't get together and make a collective decision. It's not designed to be able to act without Congress to initiate a war. And finally, and what most interestingly, I don't know if you saw over the weekend
Yeah.
that they rescued two individuals out of the sea, and they didn't know what to do with them because they have no legal basis to hold them. And so instead of trying to send them to Guantanamo, where they might have faced a legal question as to on what basis are they being held, or civilian law enforcement, what basis are they being held, they showed the bankruptcy of their policy by deciding to repatriate them. So
Yeah.
these are people they said they need to kill, so they're so dangerous you have to just murder them. And instead, they're sending them back to Ecuador and Colombia. And now Trump is threatening the president of Colombia because he's speaking the truth. Trump wants to muzzle the people of Colombia's president. This is gunboat diplomacy. This is the president trying to dictate and rule what goes on in our hemisphere over the objections of a democratically elected government. This is monstrously unfair to the people of the Western Hemisphere for Trump to think he gets to decide everything and nobody else has a say.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, these people were in the sea because their boat had been, targeted by U.S. forces. So here's the other thing: Maduro, we know, is a dictator, a far left dictator. His mentor was Hugo Chavez. You mentioned that there had been an attempt to dislodge Hugo Chavez. That was under the George W. Bush presidency. That didn't work. There has been a lot of actually successful but very long-term failed American interventions in Latin America over the decades and decades. And, it's become democratic by and large, or absolutely for the last decade or more. The Thing is, though, the reason I raise that is because the person who is, Venezuela's democratic icon is Maria Corina Machado. She is the opposition leader who won the Nobel Prize last week and who, along with her party, won the last presidential elections in Venezuela. But the election board did not allow her to take that win and gave it to Maduro for obvious reasons. But the US and the rest of the world believes that the opposition won. I interviewed her a couple of days ago, and she is on board with this American intervention. And I think it's a really risky prospect because by and large, Venezuelans aren't on board with violent American military intervention. They want to get rid of Maduro and his dictatorship, but not in that way. She is the most popular still, the most popular leader in Venezuela right now. And she says, when I asked her about regime change, she said to me, listen, Christiane, it would have been regime change if they'd allowed the election result to stand, but they didn't. They stole it from us. So it's her way of saying, and she also says, like Trump, that Maduro is at the head of a narco-terrorist state, that this is all above board and hunky-dory with her. It's causing a lot of ructions now within the opposition community. I mean, I don't know, where does one go with that?
Well, that's a classic case of people looking at a problem from their own lens and from her standpoint, anything that the outside world can do to undercut and damage the Maduro regime so that it can fall, so that the legitimately elected government can take its place, is fine from her standpoint. But that's not the issue for the United States, whether she likes it or not. That makes it more palatable to me, the fact that she supports it, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether it's legal. The issue is whether it's needed, whether we are going to humiliate ourselves. I actually believe the problem here is you can't do it. 10,000 soldiers with aircraft and ships doesn't make a Maduro, a locked in military dictatorship, fall. It just doesn't happen that way. When dictatorships, locked in, brutal dictatorships fall, it usually requires a ground invasion, like
Okay,
it did with
so
Saddam Hussein, like it did with Manuel Noriega in Panama.
yeah.
You have to go in there and physically remove them. And then, as the Colin Powell phrase goes, if you break it, you own it.
Own it, yeah. He also talks about overwhelming force. But Jamie, listen, to your point, perhaps there's a ground invasion or some kind of ground action envisioned because, as you know, I think it was the New York Times, whoever scooped the fact that Trump has authorized covert CIA action in Venezuela. And then he came out and confirmed it. So it's no longer covert, it's like overt, but we don't know exactly what they're doing. What do you think they're doing? Is that preparing for a land invasion or some kind of ground operation?
Well, fortunately, I don't know anything about this finding that has been issued by President Trump, so I'm able to speculate. If I knew something about a finding on a subject, it would be something I could never talk about. But in this case, we didn't have such a finding under the Biden administration. Now, what would it be? My guess is the CIA will be looking for ways to undercut the Maduro regime from inside, will be to lay the groundwork for a potential military action. But these things are extraordinarily difficult. We've discovered that with Saddam Hussein. The CIA had finding after finding after finding to overthrow Saddam, and it took a ground invasion. The CIA tried to kill Castro with a cigar. The CIA has been involved in many covert operations around the world that have failed and some that have succeeded. The point here is that over the years, the idea that the president of the United States can dictate who the government of a large country like Venezuela is in our part of the world is no longer plausible. Back in the era of Teddy Roosevelt, talk softly, carry a big stick. He could threaten a country, and those dictators back then would be afraid, and they might leave office for fear of running into trouble with their fellow colleagues. Maduro's been through all of that. He's stayed through decades of oppression from the United States, where we're trying to undercut him through sanctions and legal action. And so I don't know what the CIA can do unless they have a spy inside his group. And remember, we've been talking to this guy. Trump has a mixed view of this. He had one part of his team, what's his name, the former U.S. ambassador to Germany, Grinnell, talking to Maduro, making deals with Maduro over and over again, offering him all sorts of things. And then Maduro was offering the United States first cut at all the oil and all the resources. And then finally one day, Rubio takes charge of the policy because he didn't like that. And he says, no, we're not going to do any of the things we talked about. Goodbye, Grinnell. Hello, overthrow. And so I think this is a case of Trump's mixed messages, mixed views, and incoherent policy, and frankly, now behaving like a king. And over the weekend, Americans protested in the millions under the banner of No Kings. And I think this behavior of acting like a king, like he decides everything all by himself, no Congress, no Venezuelan government, no United Nations, no nobody, just Donald Trump's view that morning is something that is going to increasingly become unacceptable to our people, to the courts, and hopefully to the Congress with a new Congress. So that's what this is all about. King Donald thinking he can dictate who the leader of Venezuela is.
Right. But also, as you pointed out, really believing there's this hemispheric sort of moment to try to, as you said, China has that side, Russia has this side, and Trump has, your side. Talking of kings, I mean, the first CIA coup of the modern era was in my country, which wanted to bring the king back. They overthrew the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh, and over oil and Cold War imperatives and this and that, they organized a coup and brought the Shah back.
1953, right?
53. That didn't end great because 20 plus years later, the Ayatollahs decided that that was one of their reasons for overthrowing the Shah. About Iraq also, I remember because I covered it. I mean, the overthrow of Saddam was quick, and fairly bloodless on both sides, because the US had convinced the Iraqi military not to oppose them and promised them a role in the future governance of a Saddam-free Iraq. Then it reneged on its promise. And I remember there had been a fairly fulsome and fairly coherent State Department plan for running or reconstructing Iraq after the fall of Saddam. But the State Department plan was thrown out by the Bushis, and instead the Pentagon plan came in. And that is really what brought us to the chaos and then the ISIS and AQIM and all the rest of it, the insurgency in Iraq. It was total chaos.
Someday, some president is probably going to have to express regret for what Donald Trump is doing in Venezuela right now, because we have no business using this dictatorship, which we hate, and we're right to hate, and we support the opposition. But that doesn't mean we get to decide through gunboat diplomacy and illegal actions and questionable military activities who's the leader of Venezuela. We have to do this the right way, and they are not doing it the right way.
I interviewed Nicolas Maduro a few years ago. He called Corina, Machado, the opposition leader, a demonic witch. And she is actually she's quite a brave woman. She's in Venezuela hiding. We interviewed her. We obviously did not reveal her location. But she, I just have this feeling in my heart that it could end up badly, not just for regime change, but for the opposition as well, because even the latest U.S.-Israeli intervention and military action in Iran was subliminally, if not subliminally, designed to overthrow the Ayatollahs, and certain exiles who consider themselves the rightful heirs, like the current monarchists and the others. They were all in. They thought this was the way to get rid of the Ayatollahs, and it wasn't. But not only that, it actually it really enforced a certain, at least temporary, spirit of nationalism and unity. There was nothing warm and cuddly about Maduro when I met him. I mean, the guy just cannot grasp what a legitimate election is, or what democracy is, or what opposition is, or anything. Anyway, Jamie, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to do something a little bit different in the next segment, because I'm going to be talking to our colleague at Global, Emily Maitlis. She is one of the hosts of the News Agents, and she is the one who interviewed Prince Andrew, and he is literally on the brink of total implosion, if not already happened, because of these continued relationship with Epstein that keeps being revealed. So we'll come back and talk about that. I will with Emily, and then Jamie and I will be back towards the end of the episode with our recommendations. So Jamie, stand by. All right, so we're back with the second part of our conversation, as I said, with my colleague from Global Podcasts, Emily Maitlis of the News Agents. And why? Because she, in my opinion, is instrumental in getting the truth out of the whole Prince Andrew Epstein scandal. And now it's a huge major story again. Emily, are you surprised that there was even more to come out? And now he's had to renounce all sorts of things. The king has got involved and just basically banished him.
It's taken a long time, Christiane, honestly. Just after I did that interview in November of 2019, which was, nearly 6 years ago, he was basically asked to step back from public life. We know that he relinquished a lot of his patronages then, military and charity. We know he relinquished some of the titles then. But I think there has been this kind of drip effect in the intervening years where each time a story has broken, it has become slightly more complicated, slightly more difficult for the palace, and they've sort of wanted it to all go away. And the timing of this is not coincidental. Virginia Giuffre's memoir, his accuser's memoir, is out tomorrow. And my sense is that the king and his eldest son, his heir, Prince William, probably want to try and clear the slate of, let's call it euphemistically, the dodgy uncle problem, and allow for a smoother transition whenever that may be. So in a way, I'm surprised that it took this long.
Emily, part of the, what's causing him, in the words of the New York Times, to be a pariah prince and constantly falling to ever lower depths from grace, is that he insisted that he had stopped having any kind of communication with Jeffrey Epstein somewhere around 2010. And these ensuing emails prove that that wasn't the case. You asked him specifically about that. What kind of, we were together. I watched it go out with you. We're neighbors, we're friends. I was just gobsmacked by your sang-froid and your ability to conduct such a forensic interview in such high stakes. Did you know that he was basically lying?
It's so funny. We sat on the sofa in my house and watched that interview go out. And I remember feeling terrified at the time because I just didn't know. I didn't know how it would land. I didn't know what the ramifications would be. I didn't know whether it would end up sort of boomeranging, backfiring on me at that point. Christiane, you're absolutely right. But I went back and I rewatched it this weekend because I just thought, in the cool light of day, I need to just remind myself what he actually said. And there is a whole section where he is categoric about the time that he broke off his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And he dates it to December of 2010, when he went to stay in the paedophile's house, that Manhattan townhouse in New York. And I asked him why he felt it was necessary to go and stay with the man who was already then a convicted paedophile. He used this very odd phrase to me. He said he didn't want to take the chicken's way out. It would have been the chicken's way of doing things to call up and make a phone call. In other words, he thought the honourable thing was to go and stay with Jeffrey Epstein. And when I pointed out that he hadn't just gone to stay with him to break off the friendship, he'd gone to a house party there, he had spent 4 or 5 nights there. Like, who goes to somebody's house to make a solemn, explanation that their friendship has ended and finds themselves staying for 4 or 5 days? And he used, again, this really weird phrase to me, which was, I have a tendency to be too honourable. He says, I realised that I made a mistake. I had a tendency to be too honourable. So make of that what you will. He described the two of them going for a walk in Central Park, public park, obviously, in New York. And during that time, he says he had the conversation with Epstein and broke off the friendship. We now know, less than 2 months later, an email was written by Prince Andrew to Jeffrey Epstein with that really vomit-inducing sign-off, let's play again soon. That does not sound like a man who has gone back to check one more thing or, maybe had to return something he borrowed. It sounds like a man who never broke off the friendship in the way that he described to me. It sounds like a man who was always considering carrying on the friendship because, in his own words, it meant a lot to him. He enjoyed his company. He met interesting people. He got a lot from it. So it's made me revisit so much of what he told me in that interview because, frankly, that doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and much else of what he says doesn't really either.
So have to say this because we have to. On Friday, when he, relinquished his remaining titles, he basically said, I vigorously deny the accusations against me. I have decided, as I always have, to put my duty to family and country first. But we mustn't also forget about Virginia Giuffre and the victims. We have to believe the victims. And as you say, this memoir, posthumous, because she took her own life in Australia a few months ago in April. And her siblings and her family have been really beating the drums to get justice and vindication for her. She describes, as according to the excerpts, you say the book will be published in the United States on Tuesday. She describes some really terrible things.
Really terrible things. It's harrowing. It is devastating. And I feel like putting an audio trigger warning on at this point because she describes a life that has been broken by abuse, first at the hands of her own father when she was under 10 years old, then at her father's friends. These are claims that her father denies. And then she describes running away from home, being picked up by another predator, another paedophile, who then essentially kept her for 6 months as his own sex slave. And by the time she meets Jeffrey Epstein, this is almost, I guess, inconceivable for people who've had a sort of, balanced, happy childhood. But by the time she meets Epstein, when she is 17 years old, she has already been raped multiple times by people that she would have considered to be close to her, by people that she would have trusted. And there is a sense from her memoirs that Jeffrey Epstein saw all this, knew all this, understood her vulnerability, understood that she had nowhere else to go. And the thing that she describes simultaneously is just how key a role Ghislaine Maxwell played in that as well. She describes her as the apex predator. In other words, having a woman there with a sort of posh English voice and beautiful clothes and manicured nails normalised what was going on, not just for her, but for many of the other girls. I'm not even going to call them women because they were young girls. They were underage girls. And this idea Virginia just describes of every time she thought she should be checking herself or stopping herself, she looked over at Ghislaine Maxwell and thought, oh, it's fine. There's a woman here. This must be normal. And the power that had, really, that Maxwell and Epstein were working together, she says, not as girlfriend and boyfriend, but as two halves of one wicked whole. In other words, they knew the power that they held over these young girls together because they smoothed out anything that might seem predatory to the outside world, that might seem dysfunctional. Oh, there's a woman there. It'll all be fine. It wasn't.
Classic grooming, isn't it? Emily, finally, because I know you have to dash to your other assignments, obviously across the pond in the United States, Epstein is still a big issue for the MAGA group. And here in the United Kingdom, it's a situation about the royal family. It's said that when the Queen was alive, Andrew felt some protection. But now the King Charles, his brother, wants to have a clean slate. And as you mentioned, Prince William, his heir. What does this say about the state of the current monarch and royal family now?
Well, my sense is that King Charles probably thinks it is his duty to, get rid of this problem before his son has to take over. Now, obviously, there is a royal succession. We don't know when that will be. We know that the king has been ill. It may be playing on his mind that this is something that he wants to sort out for his son. And it may be that he feels he has a much freer reign, literally, than when his mother was in charge. It is much more difficult, clearly, for a mother, even a queen, to sanction her own beloved son. And I don't think that there is much love lost between those two older brothers. And I think there's even less respect granted Andrew by his nephew, Prince William. And we know already that Prince William's talking about banning him from the coronation. I think they'd really like the prince to disappear, do what we'd call a profumo, refers to the Conservative politician who, after a scandal broke about him, he took himself out of public life. He went off and he did good deeds and he worked in a civic way and he wasn't really seen of again for many years. And I think there's a sense that the royal family would quite like him to do that. But, his titles have disappeared except for the one bestowed on him by his birthright. He is a prince. He is still Prince Andrew. He still lives on the royal estate. He still has a 30-bedroom house. And I guess on one level, there is a duty of care to somebody who is still your blood relative. I can't put myself in the position of being King Charles, but on one level, I'm sure that also plays with whatever he chooses and feels he can do now.
He also is going to be banned from the Christmas gathering. In any event, Emily, you really did the interview of our age, and congratulations. And thanks for telling us about this latest episode. It's a huge story on both sides of the Atlantic, obviously.
Christiane, thanks so much for having me. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Just had my conversation with Emily Maitlis. Now back with Jamie and the X-Files to talk about our recommendations this week. Let's just please put in brackets here that the much vaunted ceasefire, not a peace deal for Israel and Gaza appears to be really frayed. As of our speaking now, both his top envoys, Stephen Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who helped with the last ceasefire, are back in the region to talk to the Israelis. And Jamie, another implosion when Zelensky went to the White House, and after one call with Putin, Trump decides, oh, no, I'm not going to send the Ukrainians Tomahawks, and they have to give up parts of the Donbass. Literally, my head is spinning, and it's very difficult.
We always often feel the need to talk about the Middle East and Ukraine because they are the prime newsy important wars going on right now. But I'm going to make my recommendation on something else because I think there's going to be a long time to continue to talk about Gaza, where they haven't even begun to make a real peace plan that will last, and the war in Ukraine, where Trump has yet to put the pressure on Putin that will allow peace to happen.
It's just unbelievable.
But there's another issue that's similar to what we talked about Venezuela. We were talking about regime change. As you know, the United States overthrew the regime in Afghanistan. And then tried to put in place a good, sensible alternative. And the people that killed that idea were the government of Pakistan working with the Taliban. And that caused untold damage for 20 years. And the Indian subcontinent is filled with, hundreds of millions of people, and the Afghans and the Indians and the Pakistanis are all having their own leaders use strategic arguments that have caused untold damage to the people of Afghanistan and Pakistan and India. And my recommendation this week is because I think we forget that India is the biggest country in the world, I think, population-wise. Many of them do speak English, and many of them are all over the West, particularly the elite Indians. And this book, The Loneliness of Sunny and Sonia, is about two Indian a young woman and a young man, and it brings to bear something that really, really, I thought you'd get a kick out of. Because remember, we went to India to see the tigers together after our divorce. You, me, and Darius. We spent, I don't know, 8-10 days in a car together,
It was the
traveling around the
precursor to
country.
the X-Files.
Exactly. And we really saw Indian culture, and it's complicated. Something is beautiful and wonderful and glorious, and sometimes it can be infuriating. And what's so great about this book is the cultural truths that are told by the characters and the author about how Indians talk to each other, how Indians think about America, how Americans think about Indians, and all the ethnic issues that come out in our daily life come out in this book in a
Is it Kiran
glorious way.
Desai? Who is
Yes,
it?
it's Kiran
Yeah.
Desai. Exactly.
Amazing.
It's a brilliant
I
book.
want to read it.
The Loneliness of Sonia and Sonny, and it's a classic idea of a woman in college and a man living in New York City, and then all the connections back to the country of India and all over the world, and the Indian factor is played up in this book in a way that I think is really our world needs to understand better as the world's largest democracy.
Yeah, which, remember, Trump has hit the Indian government with a 50% tariff or whatever. But listen, I'm going to do mine in a moment. Just having said that, I love Indian novels. I mean, my favorite of all time was A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, and I was waiting for him to do a follow-up, a sequel, and he never did, but I loved it so much. But here is my recommendation back to our persistent wars. I don't know whether you can see this, but it's the flyer for a new film, a feature film called Palestine 36, just premiered here in London. I went to see it as part of the British Film Institute, BFI. And it is amazing because it is from 36 and 37, the Arab revolt. It was before World War II was fully exploded. It was before the Holocaust. It was before all of this. And yet the British were there and the French were in Lebanon. And treating the Arabs, the Palestinians, as it was called Palestine, and the Lebanese as if they were vassals. And all the stuff that's going on right now, they must have learnt it from the British, the settlers and the IDF and all the rest of it, and what they're doing, attacking a lot of Palestinian land and villages and farmland. And you just see, oh my gosh, if we don't learn from history and we don't put a sustainable peace in there, it's just really tragic, but it's a great film. And as a Brit, I feel horrible. I didn't know the details of this. Vaguely, I knew it, but I didn't know the details. And it's just horrible. It just is. The inhumanity of people to each other is terrible. Highly recommend the film Palestine 36 and that book, I think it said The Loneliness of Sonia and Sonny by Kiran Desai. Righty-ho, everybody. Thank you for listening. Make sure you follow our feed so that you never miss an episode. And remember, you can always watch our episodes on our YouTube channel as well. Just search for Christiane Amanpour Presents The X-Files with Jamie Rubin, and do subscribe to our channel. You can listen for free on Global Player. You can download that from the App Store or go to globalplayer.com. And we'll see you again on Thursday for our Q&A episode where we'll be answering your questions. So keep them coming. We love hearing from you. Email us at amanpourpod@global.com or find us on social media. Our handle is amanpourpod. Over and out. Bye, Jamie.
Goodbye from New York.
Bye from the Empire.